Hey everybody. So this is the title of my talk, Things that ChatGPT won't tell you about Expo. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about Expo. So I had like a couple of questions, but Nicola already asked them. So I have another one, which is how many of you, if I can get a raise of hands, are using Expo in production right now with an app? Okay, good to know. So the reason why I mentioned ChatGPT is because developers these days, they use ChatGPT to find their information. But for Expo especially, there's a lot of very recent stuff that ChatGPT doesn't know anything about. And maybe it knows about older versions of Expo and deprecated APIs and stuff that just doesn't work anymore. So it hallucinates a lot. It's a terrible experience. I wouldn't recommend it. So the question is, where is the info about Expo? So there are, of course, the official docs, which are very extensive. They talk about a lot of stuff. They like to go depth first a lot. And I think they should be improved. Of course, they have been improving over time. But I think for the average developer that's been introduced to Expo, it's a lot. Also, there's a lot of information in GitHub issues and on Discord, which of course ChatGPT doesn't know anything about. So you have to find your information. And since Expo is being pushed so much by Meta as well, you might think as a new developer that it's a you problem if you don't know something, if you don't understand something, if something's not working, you might think, oh, maybe I messed something up. But in some cases, it's just that it doesn't work. And so I think it's good to discuss these things because there's a lot of discussions about the shiny new features of Expo, which are great and amazing, but there's not a lot of talk of like the basic stuff that sometimes doesn't go exactly as you would like it to go. And yeah, so the idea of this talk is also that it's not like I know everything about Expo. I mean, I haven't used Expo that much over the years, but it's nice to share knowledge in general because otherwise, yeah, you have this kind of closed circle feeling of, oh, there's somebody who knows about Expo, but I don't know who these guys are because in the public, it's everybody saying, oh, Expo is great, Expo is amazing, but you never get to experience the negativity around it, about which you can definitely see in Discord. Like there's people asking the same questions over and over again, and they're getting the same answers. And eventually they get out because it's not that Expo is bad, Expo is actually good. But there's some things that are very hard to manage, and they're not being advertised much, I think. So at the end of the slides, I have the QR code with the links to everything that I'm discussing about. And now, yeah, so I use these talks as an excuse to come up with the stupidest slide about me. And so I think this time I have a very good one. So let me introduce you to the roller coaster of my career. Okay, sorry. So I was originally a backend developer, which is why you see the backend technologies in the back. And but then I transitioned to a full stack, and then I started working on React Native a while ago. I'm also an Android native developer, but it didn't fit the picture, so I'm not showing it to you. About React Native and Expo specifically, I started using React Native 6 years ago, like professionally, and React Native was younger back then, and so was I. In 2018, I started trying out Expo for the first time, and back then it was Expo 27, and I couldn't use it because back then I needed to use React Native maps, and I needed to render like thousands of pins in a map, and that just didn't work, and I needed to do some modifications on the Android native client side, and yeah, it just wasn't an option to do anything if not ejecting your app, and so not use Expo. But then I tried again a year later, Expo 33. Again, I couldn't use it because I was using some crypto libraries, doing some heavy computation. And again, it wasn't really working with Expo. You needed to eject to a regular React Native app. Then in 2021, I changed company, started working on TV apps. And guess what? You cannot use Expo with TV apps back then, because right now they actually added support for TVs. So it's an option, but it just wasn't back then. So it's not that I didn't try, it just wasn't possible. But then in 2022, I finally succeeded in using Expo. And it wasn't for the main app. I moved on to regular mobile development, but I was using some native stuff. And back then, development builds weren't a thing. So I had to eject for the main app. But for Design System Showcase, which I actually presented here last year, I could use Expo, and it was a very pleasant experience. So I thought, well, let's try it again. And so now I'm using Expo 51, which is much better, in my opinion, than how it was just like a couple of years ago. So it improved massively. So now it is an option to use Expo, even if you have some native side code that you want to run. So Expo Go, I guess you are somewhat familiar, maybe not all of you, but it's an app that you can use to run Expo apps just by loading it from a Metro bundler. It can also be a URL that somebody shares with you, and it's its own app that you launch, and then you launch your app or somebody else's. It's very nice still today if you're prototyping, because it's very fast. It has a very nice development cycle. You just write JavaScript essentially. You don't need to build the native app all the time, and you just see your changes immediately. Hot reload works wonderfully, so it's very nice. But the problem is that if you read the documentation, Expo is kind of telling us, please stop doing that, because there's development builds, which are a better solution actually. But yeah, I kind of killed that vibe. It was very nice, and yeah, we had a nice thing, and they're taking it away from us. But what are development builds? Development builds are essentially your own app plus the Expo Go client within your app. So you have the same kind of tools that you have in Expo Go, like you shake your device if you want to reload the app or change the settings and point it to some other Metro bundler. You can still do it within your app. Plus, it has its own launcher, so it's your app. So a problem with Expo Go was that you couldn't really use it for anything production, because you would need to run Expo Go and then launch your app, which is not a great experience, of course. But now with development builds, you actually have your own icon, and you have all the added benefits of the Expo client. You need to build it. You need to build the development build only when you have native side changes. Maybe you installed some library that has some native code, or you change some native code yourself. But for the rest, it just stays there in your phone or your device, whatever it is, and you don't need to reload it, to reinstall and rerun Gradle or Xcode every time you have to build. So it's a very nice experience. And you can also, like, because it's Expo Go, like it's the Expo client, you can also connect it to any other bundler. So if you're running tunnels with a Metro bundler, you can connect your device to maybe some other fellow developers Metro bundler that wants you to try something quickly, and you can just tunnel it through, and it's very convenient. You cannot run Expo Go if you have some libraries that have some native code. This is not something that's extremely advanced. Like, let's say, that's why I said it's still very nice for prototypes, because as soon as you need to run something that's not, again, crazy, but like, let's say Google sign in, you need to use the native code. So for that, Expo Go just doesn't work, and so you need to use development builds. You can also use native code with Expo modules, like Nicola mentioned before, and you can also come up with your own code with Expo local modules, which are just Expo modules, but written by yourself. So about tools that Expo provides, EAS build, it's how you build your app on Expo servers. So the emoji is a little tongue-in-cheek. There is a free tier, so you can run builds on the Expo servers for free, but you have a kind of a tight limit. So you can build, I think, 30 builds per month, and 15 of those can be iOS. So if you need to build more, you're going to be, I think they just queue you for a very long time. It happened to me that you can wait like 40 minutes, an hour just before it starts building your app. So it's not ideal. Of course, if you're part of a bigger company, you should just pay for the enterprise tier. But if you're just a small startup, or you're just playing with Expo and you want to distribute your app for your friends, maybe you can use an alternative, which is EAS build local. So you can use the EAS build tools, but just on your own local machine. And then you can also use it on the CI, so as a GitHub action, for instance. So you can use the whole EAS build tooling, but on your local machine, so you don't pay any extra. To set that up, there's the EAS JSON file, which is kind of infamous because it's very convoluted. Like EAS JSON and app JSON, they have a lot. Like if you read the documentation, you get lost. Like there's so much, and especially if you're coming to Expo and you're starting to understand how this whole thing works, it's a lot, I think. And also, I think one of the reasons why it's a bit hard to follow the Expo documentation is that they're extremely unopinionated, which is good in a way because they don't force you into any path. But at the same time, you don't understand what's really important in the file, and you just have to figure it out yourself. So I figured it out for myself. And so I'm talking to you about what I think is important in those files. So for instance, we have the EAS JSON. You have a build section in which you have like the types of builds that you want to build with EAS. You can see that I think this is a nice set of build types that you probably will need. I mean, if you're really just two guys building an app, you can just get away with maybe two or even just production if you're a cowboy. But yeah, I think this is kind of a minimal set. So there's two development builds, which is kind of unfortunate. Because on iOS, if you're building for the simulators, you cannot use the same build that you use for a physical device. There's an open request for change for this. I linked it in the QR code that we'll see later. But yeah, so you need a specific build to build for the iOS simulator that doesn't work for a physical device and vice versa. These two things are the important part of the EAS JSON that tells Expo or EAS build that it's a development build, even if it's called development client. And distribution internal just means that you mean to deal with distribution yourself and not pass through the stores. And again, this is the iOS part, which is like, it's exactly the same. As you can see, there's an extends keyword that just takes all the definition from development and just adds on top this iOS simulator true. Then you probably want a preview sort of build, which is the production version of your app, but that's not being distributed through the stores yet. And it's just very convenient because like you can build an APK and just give it to somebody. And on Android, it's very easy to install an APK. You just need to approve the permissions in the settings when you're trying to install the APK. On iOS, you can also build custom builds, which are IPA files that if you're building on EAS build remote, so on the Expo servers, you can share some links with somebody that has an iPhone, and provided that they're in the same App Connect team as yourself, and you added their device certificate to the list of certificates that Apple approves for your build, then they can actually install it and run it. So you can still not having to pass through TestFlight or the App Store. And then there's this channel thing, which is about over-the-air updates, which I'll tell you about later. And this is an interesting part. So this is the environment variables for the build. So something that's not really front and center in the documentation for Expo is this part, which I think is kind of very at the core of at least my experience in building apps. Most of the times you have like a production app and a staging app. So the production app is the production app, and the staging app points to a staging environment for the servers. Maybe it has some development only features, and you want to have your own kind of distribution for that. And it needs to be a different app, so it needs to have a different ID. And so you should be able to install them side by side. It is documented. It's not like I had to figure it out myself, but it's not really, it's a bit hidden, let's say. So you set that app variant for that build type, and then instead of having app.json, you need to change it to app.config.js. I don't understand why there's this app.json at all. I think this would be much more simple because most of the time you will need it, but I guess for the beginning, it's fine to have app.json. But app.config.js is exactly the same file, it has exactly the same fields, but it lets you use string templates, variables, and whatnot. So you take whatever you set in the env for the EAS JSON, and then you can use it in the configuration. So for instance, if you want to have like different flavors of your app, so you have like the production and the staging apps, you can use this variable inside of app config. And this is how you do it like for Android, for instance. And then for iOS, it's kind of the same. It can also have a different name. So maybe you have like, I don't know, my app and my app test. So you can see it without having two different icons, or you can have different icons, which is something that's very common. This is a thing that's, I think, very common. And again, it's not something that's very front and center, which is why I'm mentioning it. This is like the Firebase configuration. So if you're using Firebase, you have these Google services.json that tell Firebase what your app is. And if you have a staging app and a production app, you have two different Google services.json, and this is how you set it up. But if you're using EAS build, there's this thing called EAS secrets, which sets those process.env.whatever for you, provided that you configure them. So the idea is that you don't want to commit your Google services.json files to a repo because it's bad for security. And so you use this service. But if you're using EAS build local, that doesn't use secrets. So you need to do this kind of OR trick. So yeah, that says Google services and Google services -dev. So it uses your local files. But if you add those files to the git ignore, EAS build will pick it up and will pretend that the files don't exist, even if EAS build is running locally. So you need to add those files to a global git ignore. And this is not written anywhere in documentation, of course, and you have to find it yourself, and it's not the greatest experience ever, I think. So EAS submit, what is it? It's where you submit your apps once you build them to the stores. And you can use the Expo servers. Again, it might take some time. In this case, I think it's completely free. There's no paid tier for this, but you might get queued, especially if you, like many times it happens, you submit Android and iOS one after the other. One of the two is likely getting queued and you have to wait like 20 minutes longer or something like that. But there are options. So there's this app that's called Transporter, which I didn't know, and it's amazing. So you just have the IPA file that you build with EAS build local, and you just drag and drop the thing onto this app. You connect to App Store Connect, and it does everything automatically. So it even tells you when the app is done processing, if you need to review it. It goes through all stages of the app, and it's amazing, but it's unfortunately only for iOS. For Android, you can use Fastlane, which you can also use for iOS. Again, this is kind of weird, but EAS build actually uses Fastlane, but there's no way to use the same Fastlane for your own builds. So you will need to have your native site code and write the Fastlane integration yourself. I haven't tried it myself. I've used Fastlane, but not with Expo. There are people who succeeded. Again, it's kind of a bit hard to find out how to do it, but apparently it's something that you can do. But what I suggest, if you don't want to go through the, or if you cannot go through the paid tier, is you can use EAS build local. You build iOS and Android, and you can use EAS submit on Android, but not on iOS. So whenever you're building both, you're just submitting one build, so it's much more likely that it will go through quickly and you will not have to wait for the queue. Distribution is also a little bit unclear, I think, because in the documentation, they go very depth first into very complex cases that are solved amazingly, but they're very enterprisey. So for instance, they tell you how to set up the whole distribution. If you want to have a dedicated branch for a feature and have a GitHub action that automatically builds whenever you push to that branch and gives you a QR code that you can use to scan on your test, on your development build to run it, which is very, very cool. But that's not, I think, like the entry level case, and they don't really deal much with how to deal with distribution for like the average new developer. So what I think is a sane way to deal with this is, okay, locally you have development builds, you just check out the source code, you build it, developers do that, and it works. If you want to share builds between developers or tech-savvy users, they don't need to actually build it, but you can share these APKs or these iOS custom builds, and they can just install it, but of course they need to give you, in the case of iOS, they need to give you their certificate. You need to add it to the devices that are attached to the provisional profile on iOS so that they can actually install it and run it. So it's not something that you can really get to the average product manager, the non-tech savvy one at least. There's a better way to do that, which is to use TestFlight. or the beta or alpha channels on the Play Store with two little gotchas. So if you're building development builds, you cannot use TestFlight to distribute them because Expo is using some private Apple API, so your app is instantly rejected and you cannot use it to distribute the dev builds. There's a feature request which is linked, again, you can see it at the end. I think it would make just a lot more sense, so you can build and distribute both the development build or your production app through TestFlight, which I think would be much more convenient. And there's this thing about the Play Store. So if you're in the phase where your app is still not public, but you want to use the Play Store for the beta channel or the alpha channel, you cannot use it because you can send invites to the other developers, but they will not see it on the Play Store because it's not published. So there's this little trick which is amazing. You publish your app in some small country that you never intend to publish your app to. And you can actually select whatever country you want for your alpha or beta channel, and you can use it worldwide. But I don't know why they do that. Like I asked Google support many times, and it's no, and it's just the way things are. So yeah. So people do that. Like I wasn't doing it because it's been a while since I actually had to publish an app for the first time, and so I was always kind of replacing some older app, and so it was never a problem because there was already something published. But now that I published something for the first time, it was just weird. But this is not really about Expo or React Native. It's just Google Play Store. EAS update. So this is for the over-the-air updates, which are amazing. In this case, the dollar symbol is kind of more appropriate because you can push up to you can push updates to up to 1,000 monthly users, which is, it might be enough to make you think, okay, well, then I should pay, but it depends really on the app that you have, because maybe you have an app that's not really much monetized and 1,000 users is not that much. So it's kind of like a gray zone. But they are using open protocols, so you can theoretically build your own ES update server. That's a link. Again, so we show it at the end. But there's no like commercial level solution for that. So it would be interesting to build something. I think I'll try to actually play with that because I'm used to Code Push, which again was for some weird reason free. And I guess at some point Microsoft realized that it was weird that it was free, and so they closed it. And so, yeah, so this is the alternative, but I think it would be nice to have something like that. And I think it's great that they're using open protocols. So they even tell you how to do it. They don't, of course, give you the whole thing, because otherwise, why would you use their thing in the first place? But it's good that they're open about it. About EAS update, channels and versioning is also something that in documentation, you're like, whoa, what is this? Like there's a lot of very convoluted cases, which again, it's great that they deal with, but again, they don't give you like the short version of it. So my very opinionated thing about versioning. So year, week, patch is the best format. So for instance, 24/32/2 means it's an app built in 2024, 32nd week of the year, and it's the second patch. So you can tell just by looking at it how old the build is. You can use runtime version policy app version, which means take whatever the app says in its package JSON as the version, and that's the native version, because the EAS update works whenever you're updating something, you're targeting a native version. And so you need to know which version that is. So what I suggest doing is use auto increment, so you don't have to care about whatever incrementing number it is on the app stores. So you can just keep pushing and it will figure it out itself. But have a version that's visible to the user that identifies the build, the specific build. So not the native side build, but whatever build you're building. So you need to have a version in package JSON, which is the app version, native side version, runtime version, whatever you want to call it. Of course, it's nice that there's so many names about it. But also have your own, let's say, user side version, which is what the users see, because otherwise they always see this package and version that never changes, but they are using some different JavaScript, so that doesn't help. So more gotchas, I guess I can quickly go through this. There's the .env files is kind of interesting. So there's you need to remember this thing, which is just about .env in general. So you have a .env with development at local. It has higher priority than development, then the one with nothing. But the interesting part is that whenever you use an EAS update, it uses your local files. It's just, I mean, you just have to remember, because the development.local files, you don't commit to the repo. They're in git ignore usually, but still it will use it because they're local. But even EAS build.local uses those, which might be a bit more weird because you have this EAS JSON file where it's defined, but it just ignores it. And EAS submit uses those too, which is interesting. What else? Yeah, this one is very specific. If you have a PNPM on a repo, don't, pretty much. And that's it. So this is the promised QR code. This is a link to the GitHub repo where the slides are and where I provided all the links to the issues, because I mean, I'm not just ranting, although it's nice to rant every now and then, but I also am trying to contribute to these issues, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff. So that's it. So thank you very much.